Welcome to the first Women in Climate Tech event of 2022. We officially turn 1 in January. So I don't even remember what date exactly it was, but
January, it's a whole month.
It's a whole month of celebration.
For a whole month. We are so excited to start this panel and the year off with Sonam as our panelist host. She is one of the first members that Helen and I had the pleasure of meeting when we were in Glasgow for COP26. A few of the fellow panelists are also folks that Sonam met in person at COP26. So bit of a reunion, but I will pass it over to Sonam to introduce the fellow panelists and get things started.
Thank you, everybody.
Great, thanks everyone, and great to see all of you. I will say that the Women in Climate Tech community has been one of the most supportive communities that I've been a part of, particularly in this space. So a big, clap for the first year anniversary. And I'm very happy to be here today. I'm Sonam Balani from New York City, and my background is in infrastructure, finance, policy, and operations. I've had the honor of working on everything from the financing the New York City subway system all the way to working at City Hall, developing our climate action plan. And through all of these different endeavors, I've had the pleasure of meeting so many wonderful women from across the world leading climate action. And as Julianne and Helen mentioned, I was lucky enough to meet many of them in person. Some for the first time and some for probably the 5th or 6th time in Glasgow at COP26. So I'd love to turn it over to my fellow panelists for quick introductions. Paula, I'll turn it over to you first and then we'll go from there.
Hi, so I am Paola Pasino. I am the Principal Officer for the City Centre Regeneration team for Glasgow City Council. So we met in Glasgow and I am still in Glasgow, looking after the legacy of hosting COP26 just in November. I am an architect and an urban designer by trade, and I've been working in regeneration for quite a long time now. And certainly my main aim is to look after the quality of life of the citizens of Glasgow and promoting sustainable projects across the city and the city region.
Thanks, Paula, and good to see you again, even though it's not in real life this time. And next we have Mar from Barcelona.
Hello, Sonam, nice to see you again. And we have been meeting several times because of the connections of Barcelona and New York. Actually, now I'm the Chief of Staff of the Mayor of Barcelona, but I've been at the City Council, at the government led by Ada Colau for almost 6 years and a half. We had the pleasure to work really tight really closely with New York. And I've been leading initiatives regarding the international relations, digital innovation, and now I'm in charge of the international policy of the mayor, and I was coordinating all related to the attendance to COP26 within the C40 Alliance, in which our mayor is Executive Vice President for Europe. And well, I would like to explain you what we were doing in Glasgow, the strength of the cities. And well, it's a pleasure here to be here today with you and to meet you all.
Great, thanks, Mar. And Naz, I'll turn it over to you, dialing in from Istanbul.
Thank you, Sonam. Thank you for this invite and welcome everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. I am Naz Bekan, a green and resilient buildings expert working at IFC. And I'm an architect by training, and I've completed my master's at Harvard Graduate School of Design. Through that alumni network that I got to meet Sonam, who extended this great invitation to me today. And I just want to say that I work across multiple scales, from national to city to building, when it comes to climate change resilience and adaptation. So hope that we'll have an engaging discussion today.
Perfect. Thanks, everyone. So I'm going to share my screen. We have a short presentation from each of us to actually describe what we're doing and get into more details. And then we'd love to open it up to questions for the group afterwards. So if you give me a minute, I'm going to share my screen. Excellent. So again, we're Women in Climate Tech. We are here to talk about how each of us is remaking our cities and building resilient and sustainable communities across the globe, as you heard from all the introductions. I just want to start off with setting the table, right, and giving you a sense of what we're talking about here when we talk about cities globally. About half of humanity lives in cities, but many suffering from floods in Manila to heat waves in Portland. And this is why over 10,000 cities are creating climate action plans, because cities are where we have the most efficiency in terms of how the human population lives, but we also are the greatest sources of global GHG emissions. And many of us are at risk of climate change, particularly in coastal areas where 90% of cities are located. We've researched together which cities are most at risk, which ones are supporting cutting edge solutions, which we'll hear about shortly, and how local governments are actually working on some of these issues. Globally, there are about 10,000 cities with climate action plans, and together they spend about $384 billion a year. That is a huge market, both in terms of policymaking and finance, and a big market for the climate tech community. I always say that this is huge untapped potential that we are just starting to scratch the surface. But as many of you know, and as was discussed extensively at COP26, there's a need for trillions of dollars and a shift in mindset to focus on equity. There are very few solutions that frankly come up from frontline communities and are scaled, especially because underrepresented founders get less than 3% of venture funding, which is critical for early stage innovation. And we need to support much better collaboration between governments and startups, helping de-risk products and helping companies navigate policy. So that's why we're launching the Urban Resilience Studio to help cities globally work with startups to build, test, and iterate climate technologies for the 75% of infrastructure that has yet to be built. When I first heard that stat, I was shocked, even having had my entire career in the infrastructure space. And again, this just shows the magnitude of the change that we are going to be seeing in our built environment, and how we collectively work together to create and design cities and retrofit cities to decarbonize is going to have profound influence on how we live, work, play, and do all sorts of other things in our daily lives. The studio is going to launch in New York, where we have a $15 billion program called One NYC. It's $15 billion of investments and about 30 different initiatives outlined in New York City's climate action plan. And as you can see, it ranges across different sectors, with everything from trying to get to 100% clean energy to figuring out how we're going to get rid of all of our waste without having it go to landfill, and reducing building emissions in particular, which is about 75% of New York City's total emissions. Speaking with city infrastructure agencies across New York and globally, there are so many different technologies to help cities achieve their goals, from mass timber construction to build affordable housing, to robotics to sort food waste and use it as compost in the city's parks. As I mentioned, I was a senior advisor at New York City Hall and helped design One NYC. So I personally know that there are not enough companies today to meet the mandates that we've set for ourselves. And collaboration between startups and government absolutely has to increase if we're going to address the climate crisis. This studio focuses on co-creating products in partnership with policymakers and in a physical, real-world urban environment, starting off in New York, where we are lucky enough to have physical spaces at Governor's Island and at the Brooklyn Navy Yard that are being transformed into climate hubs. Think about, figuring out how to lay recycled asphalt, because every city has roads and every city needs to learn how to, decarbonize that product. We could lay it on the ground at the island, prototype it with the Department of Transportation, where they can test things like the aggregate mixture, the rigidity, the durability, and de-risk the product, enabling these startups to scale in New York City, which has about 6,000 miles of roads, But given similar weather conditions and usage patterns, we could absolutely scale to places like Glasgow, which suffered from the same challenges. And the goal of the studio over time is to have multiple locations in different cities to facilitate that tech transfer. So with that, I'll actually turn it over to Naz to speak about how she looks at this from a global lens with her work at the IFC. Naz, over to you.
Great, thank you. Okay, so I'll ask you to change the slides when needed, if that's okay. All right, perfect. So quickly sifting through. So at IFC, if for those who may not have heard of IFC before, IFC is the branch of the World Bank Group, which is focused on investments in the private sector in emerging economies, like supporting them towards sustainable development. And as we're focused in private sector, of course, we also acknowledge that this transition to meet the COP needs, Paris alignments, would not happen without private sector's engagement in resilience and sustainability. So at IFC, next slide, please. So at IFC, we have a four-way approach to promoting green and resilient buildings. In one aspect, we support banks and like financial instruments through banks that will go into the market. We directly invest in projects that are building based. We work with governments on codes and incentives. And as the fourth thing, we develop tools for and systems for dissemination and disclosure of green and resilience as a value in the market so that we promote it. And today I'm going to actually focus on those two different tools that we have for green and resilience. And so the first one is EDGE. EDGE stands for Excellence in Design for Greater Efficiencies. It consists of three components. One is a free online tool, which helps you assess the most cost-effective ways to build green in over 170 countries, including both developed and developing countries, and across various building types for both new and existing buildings. So, and the system has integrated location-specific, cost-specific, and code-specific data. So you really can judge in the local conditions how green you're going. And that brings us to the second component of EDGE, which is an achievable standard of 20% efficiency that is focused on energy, water, and materials embodied energy. And so this is also linked with and it's consistent with international green building finance schemes. So if you actually reach that 20% efficiency and get your building certified, which brings us to our third element of the EDGE, with our green label, then you actually will be eligible for financing your project through international green finance, and through those and all those institutions that are listed at the bottom acknowledge EDGE as a liable, reliable criteria to assess. Next slide. So I know we're constrained in time, so I cannot go into details of specific projects because we have them all around the world, but our website has a library of case studies, stories, human stories, building stories, which you can, I urge you to go and explore. Next slide, please. So, did we skip a slide? Sorry, can we just go back one slide if that's okay? Oh, I guess we've skipped the slide. Okay, so, all right, so if EDGE is our response to climate mitigation in the building sector, then we have Building Resilience Index, which is IFC's response to climate adaptation. And BRI is again an online free tool that provides an assessment framework for resilience, which facilitates you to select the location and understand location-specific hazard information, provide resilience measures that mitigate those applicable hazards to your location, and then improve transparency between stakeholders in the sector for dissemination and exchange of information much more clearly, including for banks and insurers. So in BRI, hazards are examined from an asset perspective and rather than a human or a physical impact origin. So, and it's organized around four major hazard categories with sub-hazards. And we have 5 levels to our metric, which are based on physical integrity. And then we have the 5th one, A+, which is our highest level, actually requires the additional adoption of operational continuity measures in the system as well. And we started piloting BRI in the Philippines and have about 1.8 million square meters that have been committed by developers to use this, that they will be using the system. And we hope to eventually expand it to become a global program such as EDGE. Unfortunately, due to time constraints, I can't show you how those both apps work, but feel free to go and visit our site. I'll drop the links in the chat. And because the tools are online and free, you can play around and test as much as you would like. Thank you.
Thanks, Naz. And we'll be sharing a full list of resources to all the folks who signed up for the webinar afterwards. So stay tuned for that as well. Next, we have Paula from Glasgow.
Sorry, I was on mute. Here I am. Okay, so, well, I haven't actually seen the slides because I haven't had a chance. So I think it's going to be just more talking about it and seeing what is being proposed by them. So yes, Glasgow City Council has recommended 60 actions, and these 60 actions have been transformed or condensed into a plan, which is a Glasgow Climate Plan, which highlights the steps that are required for Glasgow to reach climate neutrality by 2030. So we actually are aiming to get to climate neutrality 20 years before the target that has been set by the UK. And this pledge had been done before we even knew that we were going to host COP26. So really, sustainability is at the forefront of everything that we do in Glasgow. And when we talk about sustainability in Glasgow, we talk about sustainability for the built environment, but also, very importantly, social sustainability and inclusivity. So we can move to the next slide. Glasgow Innovation Districts, we actually have 3. We have 2 major universities in Glasgow, and each have started to populate their innovation district. So University of Strathclyde, actually we have 4. University of Strathclyde has one in the city centre, really close to the city council's offices, and another one out of town, while Glasgow University has 2 of them always in town, and they focus on different aspects of science. Glasgow University is more about health and well-being, while Strathclyde University is more about engineering and finding and developing innovative solutions. But as has been highlighted before, the really important thing is to be able to foster a point of contact between innovations and industry so that we can actually develop new solutions on the ground. We can move on. Yeah, this is the Innovation District close to Glasgow City Council, to my offices. So this is one of the buildings that I enjoy almost every day. We are working with Glasgow University very closely to implement a new system of district heating across the city centre. We can move on. And this is a project that is particularly close to my heart. Sonam has already highlighted has one of the major problems of, or the major sources of pollution in cities is definitely heating. In Glasgow, we have a large portion of our housing that actually predates 1919, or like in the case of the example that Sonam introduced in the presentation, comes from the 1970s. And insulation is one of the main problems and solutions to allow us to bring all the housing stock into the future and efficiently into the future, so that we can reduce carbon emissions. And the reduction of carbon emission has to come from combined solutions. So on one side, yes, we have to be able to produce clean energy, but on the other hand, we have to be able to have housing that require much less energy to be run. As you know, our climate is a particularly challenging one because we don't have big gaps in temperature, big deltas in temperature. It's pretty much always damp and a little bit cold, but it doesn't really get so cold that heat pumps work very efficiently. On the other hand, it doesn't really get so hot that we need air conditioning in the summer. So yeah, we have a challenge in our hands, but we're starting to tackle it, and we're starting to tackle it under different point of views. As I said, insulation, but also production of clean energy, including the installation of new heat pumps in the River Clyde. I think we can move on. And finally, this is, I think, the most exciting part of it. We are working very hard in also enhancing our public realm. And you see here an image from one of our district generation frameworks that are being developed for 9 different character areas across the city center. I have already mentioned district heating network, and as well the Advanced Manufacturing Innovation District in Scotland, which is just outside Glasgow. But we are definitely, or Glasgow City Council is definitely investing in creating a city centre and a city in general that is well connected for people to enjoy active travel and for people to actually be able to abandon their cars as much as they can. We're also working towards the enhancement of 20-minute cities. It has become apparent during the pandemic that people enjoy living locally, and we are supporting these new developments through various policies. Glasgow as a city was born as a 20-minute city because it evolved from different villages across the core, and we're sort of going back to enhancing the characteristics of our city. We can
Great, thank you, Paula. And I think many of us can say, having been there, how easy it was to get around on the subway, on the buses, these open plazas and boulevards. And frankly, that's actually a lot thanks to Paula, because she manages so many of these projects, particularly in the city center, and making it a multimodal, pedestrian-friendly place. So thank you for that. And next up, we have Mar from Barcelona.
Thank you, Sonam. It's a pleasure to explain you what we are doing in Barcelona. As you all know, we have a great challenge in which the key players are cities. You know that state level, it's much more difficult. They have the money, they have the competences, but the main fight that we are tackling, it's at the city level. So I would like to explain the main ideas of what we are doing in Barcelona, and which is the project that we are developing in Barcelona in order to fight climate change, taking into account the most vulnerable groups, and also taking into account startups will have a key role in our policies. First of all, I would like to explain to tell you about the Barcelona Superblocks, the 15-minute city in this case. You know that we are deploying a new model for the city. It's for the people and not for the cars. We say that it's a city where you don't have to choose between living or working. It's a city of fun. It's a city where to live and work and enjoy and grow and dream and work and train and so on. So how we are doing this? First of all, recuperating public space. If you have been to Barcelona, you will surely know some of main streets, Meridiana, Diagonal, Villa Laietana. And the next time you come to Barcelona, you will not recognize these cities, because we are deploying great transformation of the cities, and reducing the space of the car and expanding the space for the people. And this will be no longer streets only for traffic to cross, but places to walk and to enjoy. Actually, we should say that the pandemic has highlighted the fact that the city is also the extension of our homes. And it's the meeting point and the play area for adults and children who don't have much space in their homes as well. The second point is specifying the traffic. We are protecting schools. This is a really successful policy that we are deploying at the city level, which is called Protecting Schools, in which we are pacifying and reducing the traffic in 200 school environments, reducing safety risk and pollution. It's a city where kids are safe, where they can play around the schools. And in schools, it's not the environment of the school, it's not a dangerous place for kids. Also, we are enlarging the number, the kilometers of bike lanes from 126 to 240. Also, we are boosting more green space areas with climatic shelters, more parks and gardens, 40 more hectares of green space by the end of the term. It's in 2023 to foster the thermal comfort of the population during heat waves. The second issue I would like to talk is sustainable food, and also it was my colleagues have talked about the sustainable food. It's one of the key issues this year. Barcelona is a capital of sustainable food, and actually, as you all know, the agri-food system is responsible for 1/3 of the greenhouse gas emissions. So for us, this strategy is a strategic issue that has led us to promote big changes in public procurement, school menus, and in the city fresh food markets and restaurants. And likewise, we are asking the states, the European states, to comply with the objectives of the European strategy from farm to fork. Third policy, public transport. I would like to say, perhaps you are not aware that we have faced a big debate that highlights the disconnection that often exists between the discourses and the facts. The last times we have been discussing about the enlargement or not of the Barcelona airport. You know that we are a tourist hub. We have thousands and millions of tourists every year. But like Paris, London, and Barcelona City Council oppose this enlarging. But I have to say that the majority of the parties were in favor, and as well regional and state governments. I should say that most of the citizens were against the enlargement of the airport that now has been cancelled for the moment. And I should say that at the same time that the state government is saying that they want to achieve the 2030 goals, and this enlargement that they defended would have increased emissions by 80%. So it's crazy. And at the same time, every day, the commuter train service, the one used by working people on daily basis, continues to suffer from a lack of investment. So here we can see the distance between facts and the political discourses and the main investments that we have to tackle. And actually in Spain, we still haven't recovered the night trains, which would be a good alternative to the plane. And also I would like to explain you something about climate justice. And we are trying to set up, because if we are fighting climate change, we also need to think about climate justice and the most vulnerable people to make these policies to gain the favor of the people, and to make that these policies are in favor of the common goal, not only for several people that it's able to do this kind of life that it's sustainable and so on. And we are trying to set an example by being pioneers in the fight against energy poverty. And we have created Energy Advice Points. It's a new municipal service. And this service promotes and defends the rights of citizens to guarantee that no one is left without electricity, gas, or water for economic reasons. And also we have created a municipal energy operator called Barcelona Energia that distributes energy exclusively from renewable sources, and at the same time is allowing us to contain prices at the time that the prices are skyrocketing. And what should we ask to states and the EU? Change the energy market. We cannot afford a market that it's it's in which a lot of people has problems to pay their bills, no? So we shouldn't be afraid of intervening when market does not work, and we shouldn't fear recovering public energy operators, as Barcelona has done, for the benefit of the majority. And also we can't be afraid of setting prices when the situation provides extraordinary business profits, while at the same time it's an extraordinary social need. And to conclude, I would like to point out the effectiveness of cities versus the, let me say, the inoperance of states. In these cities that we know that cities cannot be based on the model of the 20th century. And here you can see the model of a super block in San Antonio in Barcelona, and a place where we can enjoy the street, and it's a place where you can sit, play chess also there. But we are doing this, and we should, states should pay more attention to us, to the cities. Let me give you an example. At COP26, you know that more than 1,000 cities are fully committed with the Race to Zero campaign. And this is a huge contrast with the modest results of the summit. We should be more ambitious. States should be more ambitious, and they should count with cities to do it. As I remember in Glasgow, the gathering of cities truly committed to fight climate change, to accomplish the Race to Zero goal. Well, the contrast is evident. So I would advocate to foster the role of cities. We need to lobby together, Barcelona, Glasgow, New York, cities, governments, and also the startups that are building our cities. We have to share best practices. We have to share data, because we have a common approach and a common goal, which is fighting the climate emergency that we are suffering. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Mara. And I couldn't agree more. As someone who lives in New York and works on climate issues here, many folks who are joining us from the US know that when President Trump was elected, he actually, took the United States out of the Paris Agreement. And pretty much the day after, a number of cities, including New York, went up and announced that they were going to continue on the path toward climate action, right? And fulfilling the goals of the Paris Agreement at the local level. And again, as we started the presentation, right? Cities are big emitters. We're very efficient, but we use a lot of energy. So anything that we do within our local environments can have incredible consequences on different communities, both locally, but then also obviously reverberating effects, right? Because it's just one planet at the end of the day. So I really appreciate Mara sharing much of that. We do have quite a few questions. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen right now and dive in.
Excellent. So now I'm happy to call these out unless you'd prefer to, but I have a running list. We have quite a few questions.
Go for it. I love
That's perfect. Thank you, everybody, for the amazing presentations and for the super thought-provoking questions. A couple in from Carol Boyle. What is meant by a 20-minute city? And Paula, I see that you provided a resource, so thank you for that. A second follow-up question to that is, could each of you speak to how you work with insurance companies?
Paola, do you want to answer about?
No, it's not something that I usually do directly, no. So not one for me. I can talk more about the 20-minute cities.
Well, we can say 20-minute cities, 50-minute cities. Barcelona, the super block model. It's a city where in 20 minutes or in 50 minutes you can go to the school, you can go to work, you can go to the grocery, you can go to the library, and in which you don't need the car to move. It's a city, multi-central city, in which you have the pedestrian, the people, it's the center of the city. You know, in Barcelona, for instance, 60% of the space of the city is devoted to cars. And it makes no sense, because in 50 minutes and 20 minutes, you can go to the grocery. at the most, or you can go to the hospital or the primary health service, or you can go to the library. We have here in Barcelona a program in which we have deployed libraries. It's a multi-center. You can see markets and libraries, and you see the multi-centers of the city. And this is a 20 minutes, 50 minutes super block model, whatever you can say, cities, the cities in which you live in like a little town. You know,
Yes.
every neighborhood is a little town where you have everything and you can go working.
I think that because of how planning worked in the UK, our cities in the UK need a little bit more work because historically cities in the UK had a downtown, a city center, and then they had suburbia, and suburbia do not have a lot of the services that you just highlighted. There was a study done at the end of the 90s by Richard Rogers, the Urban Task Force, and they started to highlight which are the facilities and services that you need in each neighborhood that go from your grocery shopping to having a doctor, having nurseries, having schools, and so on and so forth. And obviously, facilities that have a bigger reach, they can be in the city center or can be in strategic location. But otherwise, each neighborhood should have all of the facilities to allow people to live locally, basically. So whilst maybe Italian and Spanish cities are a bit more naturally built that way, UK cities, not as much, but things are changing. And with the pandemic, we have seen how important it is to have these facilities. And especially we have seen in the UK in particular that city centers were empty, while neighborhoods that had more mixed use and were already based on a 20 minutes or 15 minutes city approach thrived or continued to thrive during the pandemic. And as you've already highlighted, the importance of outdoor space where people can still socialize even in a moment where indoor meetings are a bit more problematic or at risk.
Yes, and as I said previously, cities should be our enlargement of our homes, no? If we have suffered so much during the pandemic and lockdowns, and suffering a lockdown in a 40 meters square apartment, it's not the same in a 100 square apartment. So we need to think about that. This is the reality of our cities, where the prices of housing it's so high, and we are fighting also to control these prices. So we have to understand the cities. It's crazy when we think about the number. The 60% of the city is devoted to cars. It makes no sense. The cars are not the ones that are living in cities. We are the person, the ones, and our kids. And the kids should play around their schools and play football. I remember that in Barcelona, we have, during the 80s and 90s, that it's not allowed to play football at the school. But now we want kids to play football. We don't know the concentration of tourists at the square. We want tourists, yes, obviously, but also kids playing football and kids playing at the streets, because it's when a city is livable, you know, and that's the difference of the new approach that it's been enhancing our vision the last years.
Yeah, and obviously. Oh, sorry, this translates different according to context, because unfortunately in Glasgow, we don't have quite the same climate as Barcelona.
Yes.
They're still playing outside.
And I see, you know, some chatter in the chat box here about folks and, you know, how individuals can get involved in some of these planning decisions. More and more cities are looking to their residents, right, and actively doing surveys, holding community board meetings, and a whole host of other mechanisms to actually understand what their residents want. I would encourage particularly the younger folks on this group to actually show up at your local community board meetings, right, and voice your opinions. The pandemic has changed a lot, right? These are no longer held at 3 p.m. on a Tuesday when most of us are working. They're often held on Zoom. It's very much more so accessible now, even just over the past year. So, you know, a lot of what you advocate for within your neighborhoods and with your local council members does funnel up to the mayor's office, right? The planning divisions and what have you. And I would highly, highly encourage you to get involved at the local level. We have lots of questions. Another question is on insurance companies. I don't know if anyone here wants to answer that, but
I can jump into that if that's okay. So as IFC, because we are very finance oriented, in the green buildings work when we were establishing it, we made sure that we were closely linked with banks so that market presence is automatically elevated through those incentives through banks. So as we're going into the Building Resilience Index, we have the same mindset, but now we also have insurance companies in mind. So although I cannot report that we have achieved the milestone yet, we are in discussion with different insurance companies, local and global, and really understanding how they can adopt this tool in their processes of decision making, and how this tool can actually facilitate their insurance products, at least in the smaller scales, because in larger scales they do their own catastrophic modeling analyses, but they can't necessarily do it for every single building that they're going to insure. So our tool really helps them to scale that up. And so we're looking for ways to create synergies with them to work together so they can adopt and we can scale up the project.
Yeah, thanks, Naz. And I shared a link in the chat. I worked at the World Bank several years ago and actually did quite a bit of work on a product called disaster risk financing and insurance programs. So this is about how governments actually value their assets, right? What happens when a big hurricane hits or an earthquake hits? And half of your city is wiped out, right? Governments often don't have the balance sheets to address that shock to the system. And the World Bank and IFC, together with a number of insurance companies, including AIG, Munich Re, Swiss Re, many of the largest insurers in the world, came together and said, how can we, one, help countries and cities map their assets? Two, how can we actually put a value on these assets? Three, how can we make sure that we have an updated inventory of these assets as development happens, and that's particularly the case for developing countries that are still growing. And then four, what is the premium that we charge, right? And what is that insurance mechanisms that we should be putting in place? And I think some of the like at the national level, some of the very, very interesting insurance products are actually catastrophe bonds that many countries come together and issue. So small island states in the Pacific region, in the Caribbean have come together to issue catastrophe bonds because they can pool all of their risks together, and therefore their premiums are much lower. A small island nation probably cannot afford insurance in the traditional sense, but when they come together, they are able to afford it, right? And these are all mechanisms that have been successful. And I think, frankly, more and more the insurance companies are finally realizing that they have to actually value these assets at an individual level, to Naz's point, and incorporate a lot of the data at the building scale into their actual aerial estimates. So that's the question on insurance.
Question came in specifically for Mar from Jameson Rogers Gibson. Thank you for sending in that question. It says, Mar's presentation on Barcelona mentioned climate justice and equity, a critical part of any climate solution. Could the other presenters share how they are incorporating equity considerations into their work on the ground? Thank you.
I can start. So I think I mentioned when I introduced myself that for Glasgow it is extremely important that the transition towards a low carbon economy is an inclusive transition. We often say that this is the second transition that we're going through. We went through the first transition in the 70s when our traditional shipbuilding economy stopped working and there was a lot of unemployment in Glasgow, and we had to transition to the model that we have today. And that wasn't a particularly just transition. A lot of people were left behind. Well, we're not willing to repeat our mistakes. And in fact, we are learning from our recent history in order to implement a really just transition towards a low carbon economy. And the way that we are doing it mostly is to engage with our citizens in a variety of forums. So no decisions are taken that are, top down, but we encourage bottom up changes and projects. And as well is through reskilling, offering upskilling to our citizens so that they can enjoy the new green jobs that are being created through this transition.
Thanks, Paula. Mara, I see you have your hand raised.
Yes, I would say that and for us, from my point of view, this is a really critical point because the ecological transition has high costs for a lot of vulnerable people, and it's clear that we have to do this. We have no option. There's no alternative. There's no plan B. But we have to discuss how to do this in order to compensate the most vulnerable people and the sectors that could be left behind, no? The economic and industrial sectors that are dark and dirty sectors. And I think this is a critical issue that we should consider at the city level, but also at the state level. Some people has proposed a green check, perhaps a green check to subsidize those sectors that are suffering the most when they close several industries that are dirty. And I think it's a big challenge for all of us here in Europe, also in the States. I think one of the problems that the Biden administration also is because of these small clusters that they are reluctant to change the industry. So I think it's really critical, the success that we will have in fighting climate emergency. It's also depends on how we introduce the climate justice issue, the divide in our policies.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I think many, all of you know this, right? But some of the folks who are joining in, I recognize some names. For me, this is a very personal issue. I was born in India, in Bombay, which is a city that has significant climate risk. And then when I was young, my family and I moved to Chicago in the US. And I actually grew up undocumented, right? So we didn't have very many resources, right? And the government didn't take care of us in the traditional sense. And I remember, when I was little, Chicago was very cold, right? And oftentimes the heating wouldn't work, right? Because we worked in very substandard housing. We would turn on the gas stove to heat our homes, right? Which is terrible for you in terms of the consequences on your long-term health. So much of this is a lived experience for very, very, very many people across the world. And unfortunately, many of the solutions often come top down, right? They come from people who haven't necessarily had, these life experiences. And, that for me was my motivation to start this, this urban resilience studio. How can we actually create and scale solutions from people who've had lived experiences, get financing and funding to women and minorities, right? There's a very well-known stat that was often repeated at COP. About 80% of the displacement that will happen due to climate change is going to impact women. Yet women, when it comes to early stage capital, women get less than 2% of early stage financing. There are very few women in leadership positions across cities, though I will say that both Barcelona and Glasgow have women as mayors, so bravo to them, right? But this is a huge, huge issue, and until we see women and minorities in power making these decisions in the financing side, on the political side, and actually enacting day-to-day change, we're probably going to be living the same lives that we continue to live, right? So it's imperative that, frankly, what groups like this come together and support communities, support policymakers, people in finance, people doing the work on the ground to change much of this. And again, I think that's where I focus, right? My studio is particularly for women and minorities, right? To scale some of these solutions. And if any of you listening want to collaborate and work with us, please reach out. Let's see, 4 questions. There's a question from Romani about urban heat islands. Urban heat islands are a big problem in cities. Do you have any ways that you are going to address that issue? I'll just give a quick example from New York City. I don't know how many of you have ever been on a rooftop in New York, but you've likely seen that all of our roofs are now painted sort of a silver color that actually reflects sunlight back and helps reduce the temperature, sort of the on the ground temperature as it relates to urban heat islands. Another thing that we're doing here is, as a part of One NYC, we have a law called Local Law 97, which goes into effect in 2024, and it requires many of our buildings to retrofit themselves. And this doesn't just mean, HVAC systems and triple painting your windows and redoing your insulation, but it also means having more active roof space. So there's big sort of focus on creating green roofs, growing food on rooftops, doing small scale solar, small scale wind, to have much more active uses for that space, which then helps reduce the urban heat island effect. And then the last piece I'll add is greenery, right? The best way to actually reduce the temperature is to have more trees. And this is extremely difficult, I will admit, in places that are already built, right? So again, cities have to proactively address their streets and how their sidewalks, right? And take space away from cars and actually put flower beds and young trees in place to suck all that carbon out.
Yeah, I was going to suggest nature-based solutions, which is what you've already suggested. Obviously, Glasgow, we don't have the problem of heat very much. We have the problem of water and flooding, but the solution is still the same, which is to introduce more nature-based solution across the city so that we can open up our pavements and absorb the water that comes our way.
Apparently I was on mute, but hopefully you all heard what I said. Let's see, more questions. There's a question from Deepak about how you address these issues in crowded cities. I think that crowded cities is actually not a bad thing, right? Everybody thinks that living in a crowded city is horrible. Crowded cities are arguably the most efficient places, but it comes back to that concept of, a 15-minute, 20-minute city where you can go downstairs from your, high-rise apartment building and get your milk and go to school and go to the doctor's office and, and have a nice park in your neighborhood, right, to relax. And I don't think that density is the issue. Density is actually the most climate-friendly form of living. It's more about how these cities are built, right, and ensuring that that density is then complemented with nature-based solutions and open space and sort of how we design our cities to address public health and sort of mental health and all sorts of other consequences of living in high-rise apartments. So I actually do think that many crowded cities can address some of these things, but they have to proactively make that space.
Thank you, Sonam, and thank you to all of you for all of the insightful thoughts that you guys provided today. I just wanted to end today's session with a takeaway from each of you, one thing that you'd really like to leave our audience with. So Sonam, if you'd like to kick it off, that'd be great.
Yeah, I always end these sessions with 2 points. Go vote, run for office. If you're not running for office, make sure you vote, and make sure you actually vote, do the research, right? Talk to your friends, call your local city council member, talk to people running for mayor and different public offices, and understand what their concrete details are on climate issues. If they don't have concrete details, that's a problem, because there are tons of solutions out there that can be implemented, but you need leadership and financing to make it happen. So go vote, and if you and get involved at the local level, because your voice actually does matter. And we are all saying this, having been in positions of power where we listen to a lot of these constituent issues and then enact policies to address them.
Excellent. Let's pass it over to Paola.
I would say be kind to one another, be kind to the environment, and work together to achieve the goals that we have outlined today. We have to live more sustainably, and we have to live together, because well, the pandemic has proven that that's what we enjoy and what makes us happy. So let's construct cities that can enable us to be together sustainably.
Absolutely. Mar, you're up next.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here. Women, we are actors, key players on the change that we are boosting. It's a pleasure to share these experiences. I would advocate for keep working this way together at the city level to push our desires of change and to work together from the city level, governments, startups, citizens, associations, grassroots movements, because we have a common goal, which is fighting climate change. I have a daughter of 9 years, and sometimes I say, we have to go to Venice, because when you are 43 like I am, Venice won't longer exist. And this is really dramatic. I mean, I'm scaring my daughter, and I cannot do this, but it's the reality, the real world that real challenges that we are facing now. So we have to keep working together. I want my daughter, when she's 43, to visit Venice, a beautiful city, and also the beautiful cities that we are all living on. And thank you very much for inviting me to take part on this debate. It has been a pleasure.
Oh, that was wonderful. Naz, final thoughts from you.
All right, so echoing whatever everybody else has said, I also want to point out that do not forget about the private sector. They're often can move much faster than regulations can move forward. And if you just place in the right, motivations, let me say, great change is bound to happen. So we need them in that collective effort in reshaping our cities. Thank you for the invitation again.
Thank you so much. Sonam, thank you for bringing all of these wonderful panelists together. This was the best way to start off 2022 for Women in Climate Tech. We'll be sending over all of the resources from today's event, as well as a list of upcoming events. And I just want to thank you all for joining today, and to the panelists and to Sonam for being here.
Thank you all.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good day, everyone.
Bye now.
Bye.